Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. We're chatting tonight to Liew Suet Li, former policy officer for Dr. Maszlee Malik. Now we're talking a little bit about the communication missteps that the Ministry of Education had before the break, or specifically the Minister of Education. I want to understand now, in hindsight, the black shoe debacle. And I know a lot has been said about this, but I want to hear from someone from within the team, because you were with him from the very beginning, yes? So talk to me through that debacle. Why did that become such a fiasco? What were your thoughts?
Maybe before I start on the black shoes, let me just share a little bit the plans that we had actually, and the plans that we wanted to communicate to people that we had. We referred to the blueprint, but at the same time we also referred to experts as well to just come up with these three main priorities that we had for the next 5 years. And the first one would be values-based education. So Dr. Maszlee came from a very humanistic background, and he wanted education to be more than just academic performance. So he wanted to make sure that values like love, happiness, and mutual respect is something that all students, after having gone to school and university, will come out of. So that's values-based education. And then the second one is increasing quality in the system. So making sure that our curriculum is relevant and meaningful for every child, making sure that our educators are excellent in the classroom, making sure that we are efficient in terms of how we are spending resources and allocating resources, and finally, autonomy and accountability in the system. And I think that has been maybe missing for quite a while. Like, do we actually know what the Ministry of Education is doing and how we are spending the money? So I think these are the three big ideas that we had for what we wanted to do. And the whole black shoes came up because at the first event actually that he was speaking as a minister, and he was sharing his ideas for education. And he was going on and on a whole long list of the kind of reforms that he wanted to create, and which includes autonomy and quality and things like that. And I think at the end of it, he also then mentioned that, hey, now that I'm a minister, actually, there's this one request that I had from a lot of parents, which is, can you change the shoes to black? Because it's we have to wash the shoes and it's a burden for us, especially the B40 parents. And he was like, yeah, that can be done quite easily, and that's not an issue. So he mentioned it. And instead, that became like the limelight instead of everything else that he mentioned about quality, about autonomy. So, I mean,
in hindsight, was it because that was the simplest idea to grasp?
Simplest by the media. I mean, was it a failure to recognize that if he mentioned it, that somebody could run away with this idea and be much more disciplined about what you communicate and when you communicate it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think definitely that's the blunder that we had, because we didn't have the experience of dealing with media, right? Or dealing with the public. So I think we were jumbling ideas together. And also there was a lot of expectations for him to have new ideas and fresh ideas immediately. And the public expected that from the new government, and also expected that from the Education Minister. Right. So I think ideas like autonomy is quite hard to break down. Even if it's broken down, it may not seem relevant to everyone, or people may not really care about it. But the idea of black shoes is like, wow, like all of us went to school, we all wore white, but why black now? So everybody could understand the concept of it.
Right, but it did tend to trivialize his ideas. Exactly. It tended to make him sound like somebody who was interested in small things without the larger picture. And you're saying to us, he did in fact have the larger picture. Now, I know we're going to talk to some of the task force that he put together, but before that, there was this very thing. The vehicle itself of the reforms, the ministry itself, needed to be changed. And that is a story that we haven't heard much about. Tell us a little bit about the institutional reform challenges.
Yeah. So in order to really do these three priorities that we wanted in 5 years, I think we realized that we can't be introducing new policies if we don't actually know what's going on already in the system, right? So the first phase for reform is not implementing new policies, but to restructure how things are, and also to really review what's currently existing, which is why we have created a task force. But at the same time as well, we also realized that there were a lot of leakages that's happening in the ministry. So whether it's financial leakages or just people who are not in the right positions in the ministry or have the right capability, who are either in leadership positions in the ministry or schools or universities. So tasks like that, like, you can't really share with people.
Well, what people don't realize is just how many contracts go through the Education Ministry, right? I mean, this is a ministry, especially now that it's been combined, that has to look after a significant portfolio. So that was something that you guys had to kind of shape the house, put the house in order first, right?
Yeah, put the house in order, exactly. So we actually did a lot of auditing work as well, because there were a lot of big contracts that came to us, and they were, I don't know how they were procured in the past. So we had a Tan Sri Amrin, who was heading this task force, and he came
former
in.
Auditor General.
Exactly. So he came in with a task force, and they audited some of the big contracts that we have. And we haven't shared this with the public because it's still undergoing. And also, you don't want to air your dirty laundry, right? Because you are now the minister, you are now leading this ministry. You want to clean the house, but you want to make sure it's done properly before you share it with the public. So we haven't quite shared a lot of the inside work that we have to do, reforming and restructuring the ministry.
Can we talk a little bit about that, the work that goes into policy formulation? Because you have to start somewhere, right? So you start with, say, a task force, and they come up with their recommendations, and then you review those recommendations. You look at how it can be implemented within the system that you have. Walk us through the difficulties in implementing real structural reform in the education system.
Yeah. And I think it also doesn't help that, we have a diverse population who has different needs and wants for the education system. They all have different vision, right? So the reason why we created some of these task forces, they are independent, not by the government, because we wanted it to be a consultative process. So we wanted the policies not to be decided by one person, but also a group of people who are experts in their field. But they also then held town halls to get the public's opinion about what should be done as well.
So tell us about the National Education Review Task Force.
Yes. So we set up this task force about a year ago, and they were given 6 months to come up with a report on what are some of the reforms that are needed in the education system, all the way from preschool to tertiary education. This is where we had 13 very capable, independent members of the public who are experts in different fields. So it's led by,
Yeah, Bajunid.
Yes, Ibrahim Bajunid. So it's led by Ibrahim Bajunid and Dr. Madeline Burma, and they were looking at very different areas of education system. And from the task force, they actually came up with 300 over recommendations to the ministry on what are some of the reforms that are needed. And some of them include really big things like teacher licensing. So how do we improve teacher quality? We need to, get licenses for teachers. Mandatory preschool, for example. Preschool is not mandatory in this country, and it's affecting the learning outcomes of children when they enter Standard 1. So that's also part of the recommendation. But obviously these recommendations, because they're so big and require a lot of resources, will need to be really thought through, right? So after the task force sent in the report, we had to do a series of labs to make sure that the implementation is viable. So in this series of labs, we went through the resources that are needed. We actually consulted teachers and students as well on what they think of these recommendations. So it's a long process of also aligning interests and aligning people's thoughts on this, and then really then come up with a very solid plan. So we're still in the midst of that, actually.
Right. Well, when you say we and still in the midst, you mean, well,
right.
What, you wouldn't
no
have been in the
longer
midst.
me, yes.
Yeah, you wouldn't be in the midst. But okay,
the
but what's interesting is the National Education Review comes out with recommendations. Now, how much of that process do you think was made visible to the public?
Consultative?
How much could not be, in fact, made visible just because it was still a work in progress?
Yeah. So I think when we received the report, we actually debated about this. Should we release the report to the public so that they know what are the stuff that has gone into making this, right? But we also realized that it would be quite irresponsible as policymakers if we don't actually know how we're going to implement some of these recommendations. And we haven't really thoroughly, kind of really examine them. So I think we then realized that we needed to do the ministry will have to do a lot of this work beforehand, because if you implement the policies overnight, then there will be consequences, right, that you have not thought of before.
Right. Yeah. So you don't want to kind of have knee-jerk reaction and then implement and then go back and find out, well, we could have done it better. So you want to give it enough time. All right. We're going to continue this conversation with Suet Li shortly after these messages. We'll be right back on Consider This.